Good
All
afternoon.
right.
Welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers, and I'm going to be your facilitator today with Dr. Natalee Oliver. We're going to be talking about saying goodbye to someone with Alzheimer's. Not a wonderfully uplifting topic, but I know that Natalee has other things that are more positive that she will share with us. So, Natalee, would you tell our participants today just a little bit about yourself and how you got into this role?
Sure. I earned my master's of gerontology at Baylor, and one of the assignments was to spend the night in the nursing facility and take on the role as if I was someone with dementia. And that changed my life forever. It changed my professional career, and I fell in love with the residents, and I knew I was going to serve them in some capacity, whether it's working with them, their caregivers, educating students, somehow work with the older population.
Thank you for that. I'm glad that you ended up in this field.
Thank you. All right. So this is just a summary. And also I will email Glenda a PDF of this if any of you want a copy of it, so you don't have to stress about taking notes. This right here is just a little bit of my background, so you know who's this lady talking to me. And my clinical background, my doctorate is in social work. I'm also a clinical social worker, and I've just provided individual and group therapy for adults and adults just going through many different things. I've worked in inpatient and outpatient, etc. This right here is just a picture of my parents. They moved in with my husband and I 2 years ago this month. My mom is my dad's primary caregiver. He is in the middle stages of dementia, and I have been volunteering, educating all kinds of things on dementia since 2001, but it's a totally different ball game when they moved in. So it's given me a whole new perspective. First, I want to briefly talk about the end stages of dementia and to know what to expect. And so it can be difficult to know exactly, but this is just some general guidelines. It's definitely not exhaustive. But the final 6 months, usually someone with dementia gets another diagnosis, another condition. It could be cancer, congestive heart failure, some other condition. And a lot of times in the final 6 months, you're having an increase in hospital visits or even admissions. And then when you get down to the final 2 to 3 months, speech starts to become limited. It could be just 5 or 6 words a day or less. They start having difficulty or even more difficulty in swallowing. Perhaps they're starting to choke on liquids and or food, unable to walk or sit upright without assistance. They're not already incontinent. They more than likely are incontinent at this time. And then in the final days and weeks, their hands, their feet, their arms and legs, they may become cold to the touch. They may start to have just an inability to swallow. And they may have what we call this terminal agitation or restlessness. And they may be sleeping a lot more, drifting into the unconsciousness. And then you changes in breathing, these shallow breaths, or even periods where they're not breathing for several seconds or maybe even up to a minute. And so I'm going to provide you with lots of resources to get more details about the physical side. I just wanted to touch on that. And I just want to touch on hospice too. Many of you are aware, but just in case you're not, it is medically directed. It's an interdisciplinary team. You've got physicians, nurses, social workers, chaplains, and it's for someone who pretty much their prognosis is 6 months or less. And they really work at keeping the patient comfortable, relieving the pain. But one of the wonderful benefits of hospice is that they are there for just as much for the family as the patient. And they're there for the family before and after the death. And so just briefly, they manage pain, they're their emotional support, they're providing medications and supplies, and they really educate the caretakers on how to provide care to their loved one. They also can provide respite or just a short-term break so you can have some self-care. Hospices also can go into facilities and provide short-term inpatient care when the symptoms are too difficult to manage at home. And then, of course, this grief support. And so they can find many different ways to support the family or close friends during this time. And I just love visuals, and I just wanted to share this. This just talks about hospice care, and you can see on the right, it's paid by Medicare, Medicaid, insurance. And you can get it in the home or you can get it in a facility. And then on the left, you have what a lot of times you'll hear the term palliative care, and it can get kind of confusing. But that's usually insurance, you're out of pocket, and you can get that at any stage of the disease. And you can also be trying to get a cure while you're getting that kind of care as well. And then you can see in the middle the things in common. They're wanting to increase comfort, reduce stress, and really just be supportive to the family. Now we're going to delve into grief. This right here is a lot of information, but it's just to show there are so many different theories that are out there about grief. And one that you have probably heard of is for sure the 5 stages of grief: the denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, Kubler-Ross. And so that's one that we a lot of times we hear. But I wanted to provide this for you if you're more interested in learning more about the different things. What I'm going to share with you, I took the ones that primarily I have used with clients, my older clients that have been caregivers when they lose someone. These are the ones that have typically really resonated with them. And that is the 5 stages we talked about. And then when you look at Warden's tasks of mourning, just really accept the reality of the loss, working through the pain of grief, adjusting to an environment in which the deceased is seen, but still finding a way to connect with that person once they're gone. And then I really love this other one that came about in the 90s, and it's continuing bonds. And what it says is, sadly, people say moving on. And this theory says we don't have to move on, and that we have bonds with them and they can stay a part of our life forever. So what I've noticed when I have provided therapy and just working with someone and walking alongside them, we've taken bits of pieces and they've gone through some of these different theories. But the main thing to also understand that grief is very individual. It's not linear where you're going to go through A, B, C, D, E. I often tell clients it is a roller coaster. And many of you have probably experienced grief. You can think about your loved one that is gone, and one minute you're crying, the next minute you're laughing, the next minute you're angry, and the next minute you're grateful for the time. Just a roller coaster of emotions. And it really depends on the person that's grieving, the person you lost, and just the context of what happened. And so that's the main thing, is that it's great to have theories, to have a general understanding, but professionals know it is so individual. This right here, I love this. This is called a grief intensity scale. If you get this, you click on where it's yellow and you can take this questions. And this can really look at where are you in your grief? You may not be handling it as well as you thought. You may be handling it better than you thought. So I just brought up some of the first questions. And of course, you've just got some practical ones. How were you related to them? What was the cause of death? But the ones that really start looking at how you're doing emotionally, and you have this Likert scale where you say not at all the way to quite a bit, and it's overwhelming. And so questions that you're starting to think about are, do you feel yourself longing or yearning for the person who died? Another question, do you have trouble doing the things you normally do because you're thinking so much about the person who died? Do you feel confused about your role in life or feel like you don't know who you are anymore? Do you have trouble believing the person who died is really gone? Do you avoid reminders that the person who died is really gone? And then just a couple more questions I wanted to touch. Do you feel emotional pain? Are you having anger, bitterness, sorrow? Do you feel that you have trouble re-engaging in life? Do you feel emotionally numb or detached from others? Do you feel that life is meaningless without the person? And do you feel alone or lonely? And so this just gives you an idea of things to really look at and answer honestly of how you're feeling currently at the time you do this. And then I would print it off, take it to your primary care physician and talk to them about it and see, okay, maybe I need to get some extra assistance, maybe I don't. That's something you can do on your own. I want to talk about different parts of grief, and one of them is called ambiguous loss. This is what you, as a caregiver and family member, experience when someone has dementia. And because they're there, but they're not there. And so they're physically there, but you know their mind, their brain cells are dying, they're deteriorating, and they're just not the same person that they were to some degree. And so a lot of times the literature will talk about you experience death twice when it comes to ambiguous loss. Use them while they're still alive, and then you lose them again when they physically do die. And the part that can be really frustrating and almost confusing for caregivers is that sometimes the person with dementia will have these moments of lucidity. And so that's where that bargaining sometimes can come in and be like, oh, they're really doing better. Maybe they don't have dementia. Maybe they're not as bad. But that's really common where they kind of can go in and out. And so that can lead to anger, frustration, disappointment. So then you have this renewed grief because, oh my goodness, I saw they were doing better. And now the reality kicks back in that no, they're not. And so I've done a training on ambiguous loss before. It is such an interesting phenomena, and it is so important just to understand that we're losing them while they're still here. And a lot of people that don't know dementia, understand it, don't understand this. We also have what's called anticipatory grief. So when you've been caring for someone for a while, you may start to grieve about that person long before they actually do die. And you're starting to grieve who they once were. This doesn't have to be with dementia, but that's what we're focusing on today. And so the thing to think about that you're experiencing this loss on a daily basis. You know what's coming, and it can be just as painful as the actual loss that's associated when they actually do die. But when you're dealing with anticipatory grief, sometimes caregivers, not sometimes, often, caregivers experience guilt or shame because they may have these thoughts of, I wish it was over, or thinking that their loved one's already gone. And so, especially when they have dementia. But the thing to remember is that these feelings are normal. Those thoughts that you're having are normal. Because caregiving is so hard. It is a 24/7 job. And I truly think that people don't really get it unless they have to walk in those shoes. But the positive thing about anticipatory grief is that it is a way of allowing us to prepare emotionally for the inevitable. And what it can do is it can make us think, okay, I've got some unresolved issues with this person. I know it's coming down the road. And so I want to resolve those issues. It also can be, okay, I need to make those end of life plans, like with advanced directives. And it allows you to kind of experience this loss and this in stages. And for some people, because of this anticipatory grief, that there's actually less grief when they actually die because they've been mourning and processing their feelings through this entire time. Another one I want to touch on is called delayed grief. Sometimes when your loved one dies, you may not fully grieve at first, and this is called delayed grief. And so there are many reasons. Some of them are it just takes time to accept what's happened, that they're gone. It's very understandable and normal. Sometimes your feelings are so overwhelming that you just can't process it. You just can't. You've shut down. Sometimes there are so many practical things you're doing. You're planning the funeral, you're calling family and friends, you're paying bills, you're doing so many things that you don't have time to process how you feel. And so if you've cared for someone for a long time, delayed grief can happen, and it can take a while for you to actually process that grief. But now when we think about grief is a natural emotion when we're thinking about at death. And the thing is, it's a universal experience. It's what makes us human. All of us have lost someone or will lose someone because it's part of the cycle of life. But it can become intense and uncomfortable, and it's very human for us to try to avoid these feelings. And some common things we do is we try to distract ourselves, or we try to get really busy and then I don't have to process and think about it. But we are grieving the death. We're deprived of this loved one. This loss is profound. We have a change in who am I now? And a lot of times when we lose someone that we've been caring for a while, we're uncertain of our identity. Who am I? And that happened a lot when I worked at facilities. I worked at an Alzheimer's facility, that the spouses would come up every day, or so much that when their spouse, the patient, died, they were lost and didn't know who they were. So they still came up there and volunteered. And so also when you lose your circumstances in your life are changing, maybe where you're living, financial things. And so there can be a lot of fear of what's lies ahead in this new stage of life. Grief can last anywhere from 3 months to a year. Sometimes it can last up to 2 years. But it's weird that society, a lot of times, if you'll notice, they're real people are real attentive in the beginning, but after a lot of times they just kind of drop off and people kind of go back to their normal lives. And so, and a lot of people that especially haven't gone through it might think, okay, it's been a year, why are you still grieving? And so the thing to remember, and the thing you can articulate to them, is that the grieving process is individual. It depends on our belief systems, our religion, our life experiences, the individual things you've gone through. And so faiths and cultures have rituals for recognizing grief that are usually happen within the first year of death. I thought this was quite interesting, that although we tell people grief is very individual, this is so common. This happened a lot with my caregivers. They expected their family members to act the same way they did. And if they didn't, what's wrong with them? They just must not really care. And so it's, human. And so we say it's individual, but then why aren't you acting the same way I am? And so we really have to remember there is no right or wrong way to grieve, especially if someone's never gone through this before. And so sometimes people grieve differently. A lot of times, generally, men may be more action oriented. They may go start working on something outside. They may just do something. Women, generally, we talk more and process our emotions. So we all do things differently. Many people find it beneficial to share their grief and share their emotions. There are support groups by the hospice organizations. Whether you use that hospice or not, you can go to the support group, and friends can go too, not just family members. Sometimes if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're starting to get where you can't really function in your daily life, you may need to get professional help. And nothing's wrong with that. We have counselors out there that specialize in grief and loss. Something that we have to do a lot of times is we have to learn to forgive ourselves. We could have a lot of guilt and anger at ourselves when the person dies. We also need to forgive the loved one that died. We could have a lot of anger and just frustration. And I mean, we bring our experiences to the table, And when our loved one gets diagnosed with dementia, it doesn't erase all the history that we have with them. And so I just want to encourage you to get support from family, friends, clergy, therapists, grief groups you can find online. I'm sure their hospices will offer them in your local areas. So I do want to touch on some of the symptoms of grief. And grief affects your being physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually. It depends on, have you had a previous loss before? And don't expect how you responded to a previous loss before. You may not respond that same way this time. So each one, again, is very individual, and it just depends on the relationship you had with them. And so our, social norms, society, all of that kind of influences how comfortable we are with grief and loss, and how comfortable we are with admitting it, sharing to others, and such. Some of the physical symptoms: crying, sighing, low energy, exhaustion, weakness, fatigue, headaches, stomach aches. You might have a loss of appetite. You might go the other end where you're eating too much, kind of that comfort food to kind of dull the pain. You might sleep too much, where you just kind of want to escape, or you might not sleep at all because your mind can't shut off. You may have disturbing dreams. You may actually have this feeling of heaviness, and aches and pains. Again, we talked about you might be super busy, pushing yourself too much. You might even start acting reckless and self-destructive behaviors. So these are things to definitely keep an eye on. Symptoms of emotional grief: crying spells, anger, frustration. We talked about that roller coaster of emotions. Many people go through confusion. Why is this happening? Guilt. I mean, caregivers in general have guilt when they're caregiving. It doesn't go away when the person dies, and there's just so much guilt. There might be yearning. You might become edgy or irritable. Sometimes when you're really stressed, you have memory problems. You can't even concentrate. You feel preoccupied. Definitely can lead to depression. Your emotions can fluctuate, and you can feel like, I don't have control over my life. Other symptoms of grief, when we come to spiritual: questioning your faith, questioning the meaning of life. You might be angry at God. You might pull closer to Him, realizing that I can't get any kind of peace except through Him. So it really just depends individually. And then socially, this one, you may feel alone. Again, it's a universal experience. People lose people. But when you're going through grief, your individual grief, a lot of times you just feel like no one gets it and understands. And you may want to isolate yourself, but hopefully others are not letting you do that all the time. It's very common to feel detached from others. You're just not connected, kind of like that out-of-body experience. I'm just here, but I'm not here. Something else to be watchful for: you may be angry with others because you feel like, well, they just moved on. And so to be careful of that. And then on the other end, you may find, I don't want to be alone at all, because then I'm with my thoughts. And so you might feel like others are seeing you as overreacting or being unreasonable. Again, I will say this because repetition helps us remember. Everyone acts different, feels different, experiences it differently. You may actually even go through that shock and denial. You may feel very vulnerable. You may be experiencing feelings you've never felt before. Key in the literature, key in research: do not make major decisions right when you are experiencing loss. You may feel like, oh, I need to change. Let me move across. Let's slow down and let's just process and get through your grief. Events such as birthdays and anniversaries may be difficult, but one thing I want to really urge you is, that grief assessment we talked about. I would urge you to do that. Talk to your doctor, because we know you're more likely to become physically ill or depressed following the loss of someone. And so we want to make sure you're taking yourself. Okay, now we're into the bulk of it. What are some coping strategies? We've got lots on here too. I love this. This is called consider the idea of adaptation rather than acceptance. Because some of us feel like if I accept that they're gone, it's almost like I'm consenting to them being gone and that I agree with it. And so what this is that we can have moments of rejecting this new reality, and that's okay. And so what it says is that we can continue to find the lost unacceptable while still trying to actively adapt to our new reality. So I don't, when people say you've got to accept, what this strategy is saying, let me just adapt to this first and kind of live with that I'm not ready to accept it and that's okay. This kind of goes along with it, practicing tolerating uncertainty. Life after loss involves uncertainty. Doesn't matter how much type A you are, how much you've planned, there's going to be some uncertainty. And so what the literature says is that how well we're able to tolerate this uncertainty correlates to our overall sense of well-being. So just trying to get some type of comfort level with realizing we can't have control of everything. Reconstructing your identity. Your self-concept is deeply impacted. Who you understood yourself to be, or who you imagined you would be in this world, can feel like it no longer aligns with who you are now. So you need to connect with the core pieces of yourself. And so what this is meaning is that acknowledge the roles and identities you have lost or will never have, and those that you have taken on. So what it's saying is consider who you were, who you are, and who you hope to be. Other coping strategies, explore your personal ideals about the loss. This is something definitely that you could work in therapy, because we are impacted of how those relationships from our primary caregivers when we were young, and how did we see how people coped in our home, in our circle, with these kinds of things, with grief and loss, because that impacts us. And so we have this dialogue in our mind that says, I should act this way, I should feel this way. And so what this is saying is do an honest evaluation, say, are these healthy ways of how I'm responding? And where did this from, of why I feel like I should act a certain way? This is key as well. Practice dialectical thinking. So what this is saying is that a lot of times as humans, we have thinking errors, and I've done trainings on this as well. And one of the key ones we have is this black and white thinking, or this all or nothing thinking. It either has to be this way or this way. What this concept is saying is life lives in shades of gray. Grief is in shades of gray. And that is okay. You can feel two things at the same time, even if they're contradictory. You can feel angry and sad, but you can also feel relief and a little bit stress-free. And all of that is okay. We don't have to say I'm totally healed or I'm totally not healed. And so this is such a key concept if we can comprehend this, implement this as we're starting to heal. And so you may not be living the life you always imagined and hoped for, but that doesn't mean it can't have joy and meaning. I do want to talk on guilt. Again, caregivers, we are known to have so much guilt. And so what this slide is talking about, which is a lot of information on here, but it's okay to have those feelings that you feel relieved that they're gone, because you are, like I said earlier, it is a 24/7 job. And with their death, you do get more freedom. It doesn't mean that you wished them to be dead, but what it does mean is it's okay that now you get to sleep more. that now you get to have a life more, that now you get to do some of the things that you enjoy doing. And so what we're hoping you can do is say, I'm going to pat myself on the back and tell myself, job well done, instead of beating myself up for feeling relieved. And then we also have what's called magical thinking. I know it sounds kind of silly, but it's true. So if, say, had this thought, we were frustrated and we thought, oh, I'm ready for them to pass, this is just too much, and then they die a week later, for some reason we start to, in our mind, to realize and say, oh, did they die because I had that wish? No, they didn't. We need to keep that objective and remember that's magical thinking. We know the feelings can complicate grief, and we know that it can delay some of your processing it if you hold on to that guilt. This relief that you're feeling, this is earned. Caregiving is work. You have given up other pursuits of great importance. And so when you were caregiving, a lot of times you were living in this constant state of tension. Maybe you were comparing who you were or who you could have been. Maybe you were constantly worried. And so it is okay to feel relief because you've earned it. And it is okay to start saying, okay, now I can live a life and do some things that I want to do. Relief is normal. It's normal to feel comfortable and to feel some relief. The thing to do is have this self-acceptance of, you did the best that you could. And you're allowed to feel whatever emotions you feel about that experience. And this can really help you work through your guilt. And so we call this kind of sad relief. We have this relief because I'm not physically having and emotionally what I was doing, but it's still sad because they're gone. And that relief is small. Feeling better about your life and working through this does not mean you're forgetting who they were. It does not mean you've forgotten them. And so some people will try to honor their loved one that they've lost and say, I know they would want me to do and fill in the blank. And that's something that you can do. But please hear me when I say that relief that you feel of not being on call 24/7 and all, that does not mean you're forgetting who they were. And relief is not regretting. So what I'm hoping is that you can rejoice that you have completed this role. You have finished the finish line of a grueling marathon that you were not sure you had the heart and the toughness to complete. And so to take pride in what you did do, that you did fulfill your commitment to the end. Some other coping strategies, grief journaling. If you journal, you can connect, express, and explore your thoughts and feelings in a safe, non-judgmental way. I know when I worked with mandated clients, they would be like, well, I don't want people, in my jail cell or wherever to read what I'm saying. And I would tell them the therapeutic part of journaling is getting it from your heart and your mind onto paper. You can tear it up at. The process is what's beneficial. You have the right to grieve in your own way. I hope you remember that by the end, because I will have said it 10 times. Sometimes people want to create rituals around the loss. So this could be inspired by your loved one. Maybe there's something they always like to do, and you want to incorporate that ritual. You are not alone in your suffering. Remember, even though you will feel lonely, even though you will feel like no one understands, your experience is unique, but loss in the broader sense, we all experience. And so definitely, if you will, it's wonderful to come to trainings like this. It's wonderful to read about things, but there's nothing like going to a support group and walking along someone who's been through something like you've been through. You can share your feelings. You can listen to what they have gone through, can reflect together. I love this. Another coping strategy is restoring the broken mirror. So if you were going to therapy, this is one thing that you could do. Oops. And so it's this metaphor where what you're doing is you are identifying useful activities that will help you. and you resemble yourself as the broken pieces of the mirror. So what you're doing is you think of yourself as square pieces. What can you do to help put yourself back together? And what that means is it'll look different for everyone because our broken pieces are different. Another key thing that you can do is a letter to the deceased person. This is key, especially if you didn't get to share some things you wish you would have said. Again, we have this whole history of them before they even got diagnosed with dementia. So there might be some things from years ago that you need to work through. People supporting you as you're grieving, I would make a list of relationships and resources, because again, sometimes we have that confusion and that memory. So if you have a list that you can look at of who can I contact. I know I can contact this friend to make me laugh. I know I can contact this person because they can cry with me. And so really just having that list. But the thing to remember is there's a fine line between avoidance and helpful distractions. And so really you need to find that balance. And that's what this is talking about. People say, I don't want anything that makes me feel good because I feel guilty. I'm undeserving. Some people are on the whole other end where they say, I don't want to deal with it. What we need is you to find a healthy balance in the middle. If you do go to grief counseling, some of the things that you'll work on are these 4 tasks of mourning. And what you would work with your therapist is accepting the reality of loss, processing the pain of grief, adjusting to a world without the deceased person, and just finding that connection with them while at the same time finding your new life. And a lot of times people just want to make sense of this loss. You know, everything that I went through, and even if my life feels meaningless now, what was it all for? And that's something that you can work with your therapist or just friends that you're working with. What was the purpose and the meaning of what I went through? This is another assessment that you can do. It's the Hogan Grief Reaction Checklist. And this is kind of another way of just checking your current state of grief and how you can regain that sense of hope. And so you just answer these questions like, I have little control over my sadness. I feel detached from others. And this is just a quicker assessment that you could do print to your physician as well. Some other techniques you might do with your therapist or things you could do on your own. That's why I'm sharing with them now. One of them we call is evocative language. And this means sometimes instead of saying pass away, we need to say dead, death, died. Because we need to face the reality of what's going on. Again, very individual, but sometimes we need that, I guess, harsh reality to start processing what has been happening. Other things your therapist might say, or other things that you can do talking to friends or on your own, is just look at photos, letters, jewelry, awards, things that remind you of them to reflect and reminisce. Reminiscing can be so beneficial. Drawing, you would be amazed. Okay, many of us have not drawn since we were little kids, but there is something therapeutic about drawing your feelings of grief. I've had many clients that have done this and said this really helps them, that this has helped even more than journaling, of just drawing, expressing yourself. Something else you can do is if you do get with a therapist, we call it cognitive restructuring. You may have heard it called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's when we have these thinking errors like the black and white, all or nothing. But these are common things, but sometimes we need to be made aware of them and learn how to change those ways of thinking. And then metaphors can be used, like we talked about the broken mirror pieces, because sometimes that can help us as well. This right here is a wonderful article. You can see the link on here at the bottom. And this was research that they did where they were talking to people that have lost, and that grief taught me. I picked out some of the top quotes that really stood out to me, but I encourage you to read this. One of them says, grief taught me we have to choose every day to see the positive, to be grateful for all we have had and what we lost and how loved we were and how loved we were. Someone else says, I've learned that grief and joy can coexist. And then one of them said, I've learned it is refreshing once you get a little energy to make new friends who sometimes are closer than family. They accept you, who you are now, rather than hoping you'll be the old you. It will get better. Be open to old friends feeling uncomfortable and new ones being unaware. And I thought that was so important because you will be different and you may not be the old person you were after you lose someone. This is another exercise you can do. This is a grief care plan. You can print this out. It gives you something tangible to do, and it will feel very basic. But again, we can be so disoriented and just not thinking clearly. I love this. You can click on where it's yellow. You can print it. And what it does is, because a lot of people, we call it rumination, where we start thinking of things over and over and over, and we can't shut our mind off. So what you're doing is you're putting on the sheet some coping skills. So what you do is you put on there what we call non-negotiables. These are things you've got to get done. I've got to pay bills, I've got to take my medicines, etc. Then you put people, places, and things that can help your grief. You put mood boosters. These are things that you know are going to make you feel better. Taking a walk, spending time with your dog, places you feel calm. Like for me, I like to go sit out in my backyard. And so you just put all this together to help you look at this sheet. Something else that's important is it has HALT. This is where you ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? Because these things can make it a lot harder for you to function, problem solve, really practice self-compassion. And so just making sure that you are addressing those things. And so this is it. It's just a one page. You can print this, you fill it out, put it up on your refrigerator or wherever you'll look at it. Again, because sometimes we get that brain fog or we just can't think. So if we have this tangible thing, you can carry it with you or make you a couple copies. You're going to be getting back feet. So some things to consider would be take some time off. If you're working, if you're volunteering, if you're babysitting your grandchildren, take some time off for you. Please accept assistance. You're a caregiver. You're used to doing for others, but please be open to letting them do for you. Share your experiences. We talked about journaling. Remember the person. Talk about them. Reminisce about them. Process those feelings. Reestablish your social networks. You may not feel like doing stuff, but please start. You can start small, but do something. Do not isolate yourself. And then keep trying. It may not feel comfortable in the beginning. It may feel awkward. Again, you've been caregiving. You've probably lost touch with a lot of people, so it can feel awkward at first, but just to keep trying. What you're doing during this stage is you're finding your new normal. That's what's happening, grieving and processing. So forgive yourself, work through those. You may not have been a perfect caregiver. None of us are. I have days, I have been educating on dementia for 20 years. I have days that all that goes out the window and I'm just the daughter of my father and I don't always behave perfectly. Sleep. Sleep is so important. I keep saying I want to do a training on just that. Make sure you take a break, renew your energy. You are exhausted. The goal is redefining your purpose in life. You don't have to know it right away, but just process it. Make notes. Think about what do you like? What are your values? What are things that you used to like to do? What's something new? Time. Don't rush things. Take it one day at a time. And loneliness. Again, you've probably lost touch with a lot of people, but please do not try to do this on your own. Activities, take small steps in re-entering your life again. Take care of you. We know even just going walking, just some type of exercise I did a training the other day, and oh my gosh, you will have no idea if you will just move more than you currently are, how that can help your mental health so much. You've been strong for the person you were caring for. Now take care of you and be strong for you. And in life now, appreciate those skills that you learned as a caregiver. You did things you probably thought you never could do. So this be a time to really appreciate your strengths and to find joy. And this does not mean you're being disloyal to your loved one. You are in a time of transition, so don't expect to know all of the answers at every step. Here is some resources I've put on here of the Alzheimer's Association, some hospice information, and then on the right, if you want to learn more about the physical side, what to expect so you're not thrown off, that can be a little overwhelming. Here, that is here. This right here is an exercise about the drawing your grief. So what this does is it walks you through about expressing yourself. And then step 3 says reflect on your drawing. How was it for you to do this exercise? What elements make up your drawing? What do these different elements mean to you? And this, again, is so good for you. You can do this on your own of really just working through your grief and loss. The last thing I want to touch on is please consider doing your advanced directives. This is the medical power of attorney, durable power of attorney. These are difficult decisions, and I've worked with those adult children where the parents did not make those decisions. This can cause fights, guilt. It can be heartbreaking. And the great thing about doing your own advanced directives is you can make the decisions on what you want. And so if you're thinking, I don't even know how to begin this, we don't talk about this kind of stuff. Here is a starter kit, conversation starter kit. Click on it, walks you through how to start these difficult conversations with your loved ones. And some of the suggestions are write down your thoughts and concerns before a conversation. Practice these conversations with someone that you trust. But definitely, really, I would just strongly encourage you to do this. I started making my advanced directives in my 20s when I first started working with older adults. And you may have done it 20 or 30 years ago, and you may change how you feel now. So just check on those as well. So in summary, we briefly talked about the signs of end-stage dementia and hospice. We looked at some different types of grief theory. We looked at the grief intensity scale that you can do on your own, hopefully share with your primary care physician or therapist if you see one. We talked about those different types of grief. We looked at some symptoms of grief. We talked about coping strategies, and we talked about the guilt that you will more than likely feel of the relief of once your caregiving is over. We talked about some things if you go to counseling or things you can do on your own, some grief counseling and techniques. There's an article in there that I shared a couple of the quotes on what grief taught me. And then there's that creating a grief care plan, that one page that you can fill out and have a reference to. And then we talked about getting back on your feet, that new normal, and then some resources, and then just the importance of advanced directives, and then that link that can take you how to talk about it if it's really hard. So I know that is a lot of information.
Whoo-wee. It was also good though.
Thank you.
Let's see, we have something over here in the chat box. Let me read this. Andrea says, this is such a great, fantastic, unique, wonderful presentation. I had no doubt I would discover new knowledge about grief, but you have exceeded all of my expectations. This is undoubtedly one of the best, most human presentations I've had the privilege to attend. You honor both your profession and your professional field in the highest quality standards. Thank you so much. You are a gifted clinician and presenter. Oh, are you blushing?
Making me want to cry. I have chills. And I mean, that I don't even know what to say. Thank you.
That is, man, that is wonderful.
I was not expecting that. I did
Well,
not pay her to say that.
you need to print that out and you need to put it on your mirror at home so that
Yeah.
you see that. And then
Thank you so much.
Carolyn agrees with what was said there, and I do too, by the way,
Thank you. Thank
Natalie.
you.
So,
Expecting that. Thank you so
okay.
much.
If you have a question, comment, and Megan's clapping her hands there. Way to go,
Thank you.
Megan. If you have a question or a comment, something you'd like to add to this conversation, you may unmute your microphone and join in. As people have been doing, just put something in the chat box. And while you're thinking about that, this always gets personal. So my husband died about 13 years ago, and 4 years after he died, I started dating another gentleman. And there was just one day when I cried all day long because it hit me, and this is delayed grief, that it was finally over. There was no helping me out of that. I had to deal with something 4 years later that I thought I had dealt with. So,
Well, we have that delayed grief in so many things, but yeah, and it makes sense because you're starting this new romantic relationship. I can't not feeling some of those things because you may not have thought you were going to go through that again. So
yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely.
But that's what hit me when you were talking about delayed grief was that
Yeah.
experience came back to me. Um, okay, let's see. Nobody has their microphone unmuted. Let me go ahead and tell you then what's coming up on the Caregiver Teleconnection. I'll be back with you tomorrow at 11 o'clock Central Time. Cynthia Hazel will be with me. And if you haven't heard Cynthia, please tune in tomorrow. There again, it's 11 o'clock Central Time. She's going to be talking about combating compassion fatigue, which is with caregivers, that's a lot of stuff. Then on the 24th, Barry Jacobs, one of my favorites, is going to be back with us. He's going to be talking about how family members can cope with sudden caregiving. That's on the 24th at 11 o'clock. Carolyn, I see that you have your hand up. Please unmute your phone and go ahead. Let me see. I show that your microphone is on. There you are. There you are.
Hi.
Oh, can't hear you though.
You're still on mute.
Try it again. No, I don't know why we can't hear you, Carolyn, because your microphone was unmuted, but we could not.
Volume could be down on your phone.
Yeah,
The volume.
maybe try the volume, increase it on your telephone. No. Oh, I'm sorry, Carolyn. We just can't hear you. Oh, I feel terrible about that. Keep trying things, and when if you get it to work, just speak up, and I'll come back to you. Let's see. Raina says this was a hard class. I work with the elderly. I see them go through this all the time, and it's still hard. It is hard to watch other people go through this.
It is, definitely.
Minerva put in the chat box, we are having a summit coming up in November. And so she has links to everything there. Please check that out. You can do it in person. You can do it in smaller groups, I understand, Minerva, or you can do it virtually. So check out those links also. It's going to be a good one. Carolyn, anything yet? Don't understand why we can't hear you, Carolyn. I'm sorry. Andre said, I also think that many of the elements you brought up could apply in other grief situations. For example, leaving behind a great job for another one, losing a friendship, definitely losing a friendship.
Definitely.
For sure. It's just loss all over the place. So
There is. And that reminds me, losing a friendship. When I was doing a training on something else the other day, there was a quote I read that said, it was talking about how when someone's talking to you saying they're just not reciprocating, they're not being the kind of friend that I am. And what it talked about is maybe they're not really your friend anymore. And that can be really a hard thing to process, but sometimes people are put in our life for stays. And so definitely it can be applied to many, many things.
it can. Divorce. There's another one.
Divorce.
It's so
Yes.
much like, and I've gone through both. It's so much like death.
Yes.
Sandra says, great presentation. A lot of things really hit home. I lost my mom due to Parkinson's with dementia in 2021. One thing I noticed is a kind of feeling like I'm grieving for two people, the mom I knew, the mom I grew up with, and the mom that I took care of for years. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. What that is, I mean, the way you express that is definitely right on that. Just, going back to that ambiguous loss that, who they were, who they are now, and definitely that's such a good point that you're grieving for two different people, even though it's the same person. Thank
Oh,
you.
that really hit home. That really,
Yeah.
thank you, Sandra, for so much for sharing that. Um, So as Natalie said, she's going to put her presentation in a PDF and get it to me, and I will see that you receive that. In a few days, you'll receive a follow-up email if you registered for the session today, and that will include Natalie's presentation. You'll you will also be asked to give us feedback on this presentation. We've got a lot of it here. And let us know if there's a topic that we haven't covered, because we'd love to do some research on that and use one of our current presenters to find a new presenter. Or if you've heard someone present that you think would be good on the caregiver teleconnection, let us know who that person is. Carolyn also says, my mom is suffering dementia and I'm living the grieving while she's still alive. I miss my mom and this one is so lost. Thanks again. I need to review this again.
Thank you for sharing. I know that's really difficult. It's very, very hard.
There's nothing easy about caregiving. And all the years
Mm-mm.
I've been doing the connection, it still touches me. And like you said, Natalie, I want to cry.
Yeah.
When you're feeling what caregivers are feeling as they're going through
Mm-hmm.
this. Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. We have a couple of minutes. Anyone else? Poor Carolyn, I feel so bad. Carolyn. um, okay, so Minerva says our recording will be posted on our caregiver teleconnection website, and she put the information again so that you will have that also there. Well, if you've been with me before, I'm not going to hold you for another minute just because, just because. So we're going to end the session. Natalie, I say everything that everybody said in the comments for you.
Thank
You're a
you.
wonderful presenter. You have a
Thank
wealth
you.
of information, but you share it in such a human way
Thank you.
that it's easier to digest. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope to see you again on the Caregiver Teleconnection real soon. Take care and know that I appreciate everything you do for the person you're caring for. Take care of
Yes,
yourself. Bye-bye.
definitely. Bye. Thank you.